Hello, everyone, and welcome to Connecticut River Conservancy's live stream. We're in season 3, and this is episode 3, Stories of Impact, Community Science Comes Alive at CRC. My name is Stacy Leonard, and I'm the events coordinator here, and excited to be here with all of you today and to share in CRC's incredible community science program and the unique and pivotal role that our volunteers play in this work. And we do have 4 of our volunteers here with us today, and I'll introduce them shortly. First, just a couple of little housekeeping details. We're recording the meeting, and we'll have a link available for you to listen to on our YouTube channel. It will be posted within the next 24 hours or so, and I'll be sending an email after the presentation with a list of all the resources that are talked about today and a link to that recording. We have a busy and full program, but we want to answer your questions. So just a reminder to put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the program. So we have a wonderful lineup for you today. We're going to start with Aliki Fornier, our ecology planner, and she'll guide us through the hour. She'll share the benefits of the community science as a methodology within the scientific community and segue to each of CRC's programs, in which our 4 volunteers will share their stories. And they will present in this order. First, Rodrigo Pinto, who's been a volunteer in our water chestnut surveillance program and sea lamprey nest monitoring, and excited to say he's now our new field manager of our invasives program in Connecticut. Our second presenter will be Gary Powsner, who's volunteered with our water chestnut and water quality monitoring programs, and is also a Source to Sea volunteer. And following Gary will be Emily and Brian Burkholder, who are joining us from DC, and they participate in our tree planting and bank restoration program. So I want to thank all of our speakers for being here today and sharing their stories. And I'm going to turn this over to Aliki to lead us on. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Stacy. So in our world of nonprofit management, scientific discoveries, and environmental advocacy, we throw the word community science around a lot. And today I'd like to introduce you folks to CRC's community science realm and a few volunteers who have contributed to our work. Community science, also known as citizen science, is defined as scientific activities in which the general public participates to some degree in data collection, analysis, and sharing of results. It's the art of bringing our scientific community and our public together for a common benefit. Community science has become a common, if not necessary, tool in water studies such as water quality, meteorology, flood control, stormwater, and pollution monitoring. And it can now be incorporated in most scientific projects. And that is what we strive to do as an organization, as it is part of our mission to educate our communities and facilitate the scientific work required to save the rivers. So the benefits to the public include broadening their awareness and understanding of local environmental problems, providing opportunity to spend time outdoor and provide meaningful contributions while doing it, meeting other members of the community who share their interests, and very importantly, contribute to their education and science for youth, but also for adults. And to the scientific community, benefits include increasing the quantity and frequency of observational data by utilizing enthusiastic non-professionals, bringing more funding to certain projects, whether via federal or state level support or community support via donations, and engaging their communities to get feedback from their work and get a sense on how to communicate with non-professionals to make the work relevant. There are different levels of involvement between community scientists and professionals, and this figure from an article published in the Wiley Interdisciplinary Reviews portrays that perfectly. Collegial level research is primarily designed and conducted by non-professionals. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have contributory research, which lacks the community science aspect as it requires professional knowledge and discipline. And CRC's projects fall within the collaborative and co-created types of research projects. Co-created projects are established equally between professionals and community scientists. And collaborative research is often led by professionals, but will incorporate community scientists in the data collection and analysis report. Here's an introduction to our first community science project, studying migratory fish that spawn or reproduce in the Connecticut River watershed. So every year, fish species migrate up our freshwater rivers from seed to spawn or reproduce, in other words, and we call those anadromous fish. Some of them go back to sea, and others end their life cycles after spawning, and those leave really important nutrients behind. And we'll talk about one of them today. A group called the Connecticut River Atlantic Salmon Commission, or CRASC, brings federal and state fisheries, nonprofits, university researchers, and other stakeholders to discuss the Connecticut River's migratory fish statuses. Their main concern is the decrease in fish populations and habitats in our watershed. And as a group, they discuss harms to our environment, such as non-regulated hydropower and lack of fish passage, or overfishing, or habitat loss due to erosion or pollution. Within this collaborative, CRC participates in studies of blueback herring and alewife populations, both part of the Elocine or shad subfamily. Through community-based monitoring, we've identified streams used by river herring to spawn or reproduce, and volunteers provide invaluable data at streams they adopt during their migration season by tracking presences and absence, as well as quantitative data. And we also study sea lamprey spawner populations. It's an endangered migratory fish, often confused with the invasives of the Great Lakes. Sea lamprey monitoring is my personal favorite activity. We wade in small tributaries of the Kinetic River, identifying good habitat and finding sea lamprey nests. You heard me right. Sea lamprey build nests in riverbeds that are easy to identify after the first few ones. Being able to identify nests in a river stretch, volunteers can estimate lamprey spawner population. And we find that there are 2 adults per single nests, but sometimes we encounter community nests that were built by more than one pair of spawning lamprey. Depending on the size of the community nests, we can estimate how many pairs of spawning lamprey built it. The information that the community scientists collect during these studies is relayed back to the CRASC group. And this information is used to design experiments to bring fish populations up again, such as trapping and trucking species, or transporting them to different habitats where they might have a better chance. They also use this data to influence hydropower relicensing agreements to request better fish passage at major dams, or evaluate old dams that need to be removed. Now I'd like to introduce you to a community scientist and a new staff at CRC, Rodrigo Pinto, who will share his experience working with the Connecticut River Conservancy.
Thank you, Aliki, and thank you, Stace, and everyone for being here, inviting me into this event. And it goes with the Connecticut River Conservancy, which has made me feel right at home ever since I first ran into it a couple of years ago. I was first in awareness in any way of the organization when I ran into a sign literally on a tree at the trail and boat launch in the South Windsor suburb of Hartford, upstream from Hartford. And so casually as I happened into this organization, it really struck me right away as a major milestone in what to me had been a stubborn search or a dream to try to do something along the lines of an urban wildlife refuge in Hartford. And I've been after this for a few years, and it's something I still personally, want to realize someday, to do something in Hartford with partners like Lee Misha Sean Razi, and others who could do what Springfield's already doing upstream, having an urban wildlife refuge partnership of its own. There's another one down the road in New Haven, and dozens of cities around the US. Cities that, like Hartford, are on a refuge or within 25 miles of one have these sort of partnerships. So from there, I checked out the website of CRC, learned more about the organization. It was there that I first ran into these sort of volunteer programs. And the one for sea lampreys, as well as the Source to Sea, which I haven't done as much as Gary has, and Gary can tell us more about that later. But those were the ones that I first volunteered into. And what first drew me to them is the fact that both of them have this sort of coastal concern that I've kept in mind for many years. And clearly, this is the coastal ecosystem where the trash is going to flow downstream. And as far as sea lampreys, I had never really heard of them. Really interesting looking animal, kind of intriguing image to see on the website. Also, a name that had the sea on there. So, sea, I thought, okay, I'll take a look. Sounds coastal enough. And from there, I learned exactly about how these, fish migrate to and from the sea. Anadromous they are. I can't really pronounce that word. But before, another thing I couldn't really do about sea lampreys before I volunteered, I couldn't really picture exactly what this would be like as an experience. And so my first sort of subconscious level kind of sort of imagination was, okay, maybe the highlight would be to see the actual animal, because I had done some community science with, groups like BirdLife International here in Connecticut, counting crows and other birds, as well as done some similar sort of community science in Brazil, there with Reef Check Worldwide, counting corals and other tropical sort of animals on the reefs there. So with these sort of in mind, at some level, I came in to think, okay, this will be the kind of, highlight of the experience. But I was in for quite a surprise. Instead, it was a treat to figure out that, once I got my feet wet with the sea lampreys in the way that Aliki was saying, sort of wading through these waters, as you can see in that image there, I learned that really the highlight is quite different. And I want to give you a spoiler alert here. If anybody hasn't volunteered yet, decides to do so, maybe you want to block your ears for a moment, and I'll give you a cue when I'm done. But what I eventually did see was how instead, my favorite part of the experience was rather to have this sort of aha moment at the end, an epiphany that comes after you, spend the whole, in this case, was the whole morning wading through these waters, and what felt like, going a pretty long stretch, pretty far away, we thought, in these sort of meandering brooks and, streams. And so it was, really a grand finale to come out of, at the end of the experience. And once we get our feet and head out of the water, we realized we had barely crossed the street, really just barely snaked around our cars. And if, I could tell the person leading this event, seeing that reaction many times, we were all sort of laughing at ourselves out loud as we were finishing up. It was really kind of a nice street. And now if you've been blocking your ears, you can listen in again, no spoiler there. But, the other program, the Source to Sea, which I did next, was a little more like I'd imagine it would be. I'd done more similar kinds of cleanup events. And it was a labor of joy, really surprisingly fun in its own way. The particular organization I joined was led by high schoolers, an environmental club of a high school group. And these are, of course, students who are devoted enough to get up early in the morning on the weekend to host these cleanups, rather than sleep in after a night of underage drinking, which is the funny thing. If you think I'm going on digression sort of tangent, what I found myself doing is actually trying to pitch to these kids, your voice would really get the ear of a legislator to hear an underage, constituent express concern and maybe a position to ban nip bottles, which is most of what we picked up there. And I'm sure Gary has seen a lot of those as well. We really sort of carry some weight and credibility, but it was just one of the neat things, to get to bounce idea with other volunteers, which is really the highlight for me, volunteering, whatever the program might be. And it's just a lot of fun to be on the water, surrounded by the camaraderie of like-minded people, volunteers who are doing this for the love of it. And so it was the case with, each of these programs. It's also been a joy to now do this as work, with the program for water chestnut surveillance, harvesting these invasive plants. And so it's really the kind of fun time that we share that brings me back now, actually a few times a week, getting the plants out of the water. It feels like sort of gardening in a community garden kind of experience, gardening the water in much like a community garden. So it's really a lot of fun. And then even after these events, there's the kind of, fun thing that CRC will organize, like the trash talks, which is just kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing that actually is quite civil, trash talking, debriefing of what we come across, nip bottles and other kinds of litter. So it's just that kind of nicely mobilizing green atmosphere that really does it for me. And so again, just to wrap it up, finally, I'm really grateful to the Connecticut River Conservancy and all its supporters, for making all of this possible and for welcoming me into the river as a second home, really. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. That was amazing. And thank you for sharing your story. Now we're getting into an interesting restoration project. At CRC, volunteers, staff, and partners all work together to control and reduce the spread of aquatic invasive species. Water chestnut in particular is a species that has spread across our watershed uncontrollably. And thanks to decades of community science work from all partners in the watershed, we know where these infestations are located and what we need to do to be successful in our work of removing them. This program is primarily volunteer run, as dedicated individuals commit to spending time on the river over the summer, removing water chestnut and reporting their data back to us. Data such as how much they saw, how much they removed, and how much there's left. This plant requires an insane amount of attention, as each plant can produce up to 15 rosettes, which are the surface leaves represented in this diagram and in the picture. And in turn, each rosette can produce dozens of seeds or nuts during the season. And each seed is viable for 12 years. So 1 year, even just 1 year of missing a water chestnut plant can be disastrous for the effort. With these findings, we can track the rate of spread over seasons, and if an infestation is not taken care of annually, we know how to manage it in the following years to avoid a monoculture. A monoculture happens when a plant species has overtaken an area and pushed out all other organisms. With that, we understand the importance of collecting early in the season, as later the plant grows more rosettes, which makes the labor much more difficult. Next, Gary Powsner has been a volunteer with CRC for over 10 years. And since I joined at the Connecticut River Conservancy, he's helped me control water chestnut growth at Barton's Cove, a lovely place to paddle in Turner's Falls in Gale, Massachusetts. I'll let Gary share his story with you all. Hi, Gary. So what brought you to the organization and the programs you've committed to?
Well, we've always been enthusiastic paddlers and enjoyers of nature. And when we moved here to Sunderland, we actually live right on the river. And when we learned about the work that CRC was doing, it was just kind of a no-brainer. It's like, this is our front yard, in our backyard, in our side yard, because we have waterfalls from the watershed on either side of us. And we're right in the middle of the Mount Toby watershed. So we belong to a number of organizations and try to volunteer and help, and this is definitely was one of the priorities. Hey, we want to take care of it. We already do take care of these things, but this really made sense to become more active.
And how can you tell me a bit about how the programs relate to your lifestyle or your hobbies or even your work life?
Well, basically, and I want to mention, we also do the source to sea cleanup, and that's something that it's part of our daily walk, is picking up trash from along the highway, because people kind of think this is their personal garbage dump. My work, it actually is partly environmentally based in terms of one of my businesses has to do with reducing waste and eliminating toxic products from people's use. So that's one of the things I do. And as I said at the beginning, I I mean, we paddle, we bike, we hike, we swim. We actually swim right across the street in the river. And so it's really, it's just part of our lifestyle
Mhm.
to be part of this.
And you've included friends in the water chestnut work, haven't you? Can you tell me about how you convinced them to get involved?
Yeah, well, actually, there we are in this picture. That's me in the middle with the hat, Christy to my right, yep, and Peter to my left. And then two over to the right is our friend Jed with the gray hat. And yeah, so there's a few things I do. One thing is I post the event to my Facebook page and reach out to friends saying, using social media and email, say, hey, we're going to be doing this. Anybody want to join us? And then actually the day of, I post that we're doing it. And then probably this picture got posted that day on Facebook. And I actually did a Facebook Live to make sure people knew about it. So whatever I can do to increase the awareness and also recruit people to join us. And I will say that I kind of somewhat, I don't know if it's not apologetically, but I gave them, our friends, a heads up and saying, just so you know, this isn't one of our usual active paddles. Mostly we're sitting around in the boat pulling stuff. And they had a great time. As you can see, look at their smiles.
That was a great day. When we pulled those that full patch of water chestnut right by the dam in Turner's Falls, the old bridge. That was a lot of fun. And can you share a funny or interesting anecdote of a time you were participating in this program or another that meant something to you?
Well, actually, this particular one is when we had our friends there, we were in the boats and we we're having trouble getting down to the plants, from the boat. I tell you two quick things. But in this case, I think Peter went first. And he just like jumped out of the boat. And I was like, okay. And it was just so much easier actually, because then you're not trying to balance in the boat. And I know we're probably not supposed to do that. Maybe I wasn't supposed to say that, but anyway, there it is. And then we could just reach down and pull them up. And the other fun time, I don't think Christy will mind my sharing this, we were actually boating with some friends at another area, not part of this, but Lake Warner. And we've gotten so entrained now that when we see water chestnut, it just kind of like, bingo, da, and we boom right in on it. And we saw some water chestnut. And so we headed straight for it. The friends we were paddling with just went on. And as we were doing it, Christy's boat capsized in like a foot of muck. And we just carried on, got the water chestnut out and carried on with our day.
Well, I love that story. And I really appreciate you and Chrissy's commitment to the work. I will say it is a common I wouldn't say problem, but something all the volunteers experience after their first couple of water chestnut pulls. Wherever they go to paddle or enjoy the river after that, they always look for water chestnut. It's it's addicting.
Yeah, it is.
Oh.
It is a risk.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Gary. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So next, water quality monitoring. That is something we are all concerned about, considering water is a vital part of our lives, and not only for drinking, but also for swimming, boating, and fishing. Community scientists at CRC commit to taking samples of the river and its tributaries so it can be tested for bacteria and pollutants. And the picture on the left with the magnifying icon is a microplastic sample that we collected and analyzed last fall. We suspect the blue fragment is actually a piece of blue tarp, and for scale, the space between each dot that you see on the larger picture is 300 micrometers or 0.3 millimeters. So that's absolutely tiny, and the fragment is not visible to the naked eye. So this picture was taken under a microscope. We also test for bacteria using the CoLalert system, which is represented in the picture above. And this system standardizes how lab samples are processed without the error margin of using different personnel or equipment for bacteria analysis. Water samples are tested for E. coli bacteria specifically because E. coli is a good indicator for harmful bacteria in the sample. And the water samples are injected in these little cubes with reactive agents that show us how much bacteria is in a 100 milliliter sample. The fluorescent cubes indicate that there is at least one E. coli colony in the cube, and the dark cubes indicate that there is at least one coliform bacteria colony, but there is no E. coli. So coliform bacteria is a type of bacteria, and E. coli is a type of coliform, but not all E. coli's are, not all coliforms are E. coli's. And even the healthiest, cleanest water will still have some coliform bacteria present, but not all are harmful to us. The CoLalert system allows us to measure bacteria levels as colony forming units in 100 milliliter samples of water, which is the CFU per 100 milliliter unit that you see on the chart. Our results are posted weekly on our website. Is it clean or está limpio? You can also find it in Spanish. And this interactive tool is updated on a weekly basis thanks to volunteers' commitment. Recreational swimmers, boaters, and fishermen can visit the page before their ventures to the rivers to make sure that bacteria levels are safe for their activities. Bacteria levels are considered safe for boating and swimming when the sample tested no more than 235 colony forming units per 100 milliliter. The frequent and consistent data collection allows us to monitor rivers even during important meteorological events, and the data can be tracked and compared over the years to point out the relevant patterns, such as increase in bacteria levels after rainstorms or the sodium levels increase after snowmelt. There's a lot we can do to help the watershed against pollution and bacteria, such as regulating sewage overflows and other things such as planting more trees. So trees slow rainwater runoff, reduce flooding, erosion, and pollution as their roots act as absorbents and filters to harmful bacteria and pollutants from reaching the rivers. Through its roots, leaves in the wood and trees capture the carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, and the trees pull in greenhouse gas, which in turn helps grow their leaves, branches, and roots. And this concept has encouraged non-government organizations such as us and others, and businesses and individuals to plant more trees to offset current emissions and slow climate change. Trees also provide important habitat, not only for birds, but other animals important to our system, such as fish, beavers, reptiles, and amphibians. And a watershed without its wildlife population doesn't have a functioning ecosystem. Trees provide something we can all appreciate, but may take for granted, and that is shade. Shade is not only important for our health and pleasure during the hot seasons, but also for wildlife and the river's temperatures. A canopy over the river can make a big difference in the summer for all the critters that are living and growing in our systems. And we know all of this thanks to the scientific community and volunteers who, over the centuries, had a natural interest in learning more about the important roles of trees. And thanks to our restoration volunteers, we plant tens of thousands of trees every year in areas that could use them. Here's a good graphic of how trees through photosynthesis absorb greenhouse gas and mitigate the effects of climate change. The most notable use of trees is stabilizing the river after an old dam has been removed. Removing a dam, granted, is the best thing we can do for the tributary, but it is also quite an invasive process as it requires heavy machinery, soil removal and replacement, and temporarily disturbing the habitat around. This process leaves the soil loose and without strength, or structure, making it easier for a flood to swipe the land and habitat away. And to help the river find its natural flow after this process, volunteers plant trees along the bank to stabilize or hold together the new soil and give the river flow a chance to find its course. I'd like now to introduce you to friends of CRC and representatives of Trout Unlimited Upper Valley, Brian and Emily Burkholder, who have participated in tree plantings and have even brought their kids to enjoy the activities with us.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to join you.
Thank you.
So I guess the way that we got started with CRC was that a number of years back, I've always been interested in fishing, always enjoyed fishing. And when I moved down this way and was dating Emily, the fishing opportunities that I had enjoyed weren't available to me anymore. So I decided I was interested in fly fishing, and I didn't know anything about fly fishing, which also meant trout fishing, which I didn't know anything about, which also meant fishing rivers, which I didn't know anything about. So I felt I needed some guidance and some instruction. And in searching out information, I came across Trout Unlimited, and someone had invited me to a Trout Unlimited meeting, and things just kind of flowed from that point. So the first year I would have been fly fishing would have been just before our daughter was born, and our oldest. And as time went on, and I became more and more involved with fishing and Trout Unlimited, CRC became part of the things that I did. Our children were a little too young at that time to come with us, but it's always been important to us. I think that both of us had learned as youth, teenagers, the value of contributing and giving back, doing something to make things better. And both of us have a hard time saying no when someone asks us to help with a service project. When our kids became old enough, really when they were too young to be any real effective help, we had tried to make a point of bringing them with us to tree plantings and to other projects like that.
And I'll just share a little story about one of the first times we took our children to a tree planting. They were of toddler age, and our children are currently 13, 12, and 10. And so this was several years ago. We were at a tree planting, and they said, well, how big do we need to dig the hole? And I had mentioned to them, if it's big enough to fit your body in, then it's big enough, to just kind of give them a picture of how large the hole needed to be. And after some time had passed and they were digging with their shovels and I had planted a few trees, they were like, Mom, is this big enough? And I turn around and our youngest is sitting in the hole, and he's like looking up like, I think it's big enough. I'm like, yeah, it's big enough. Now let's plant the tree and move on to the next one. And it was just so easy to teach them at such a young age about the importance and bringing them back to each. There's a couple of places we've gone back to see the progress, and it's been really nice to see and to show them that our work and our efforts are for the good of the earth and for building a stronger and healthier riverbed and area. So
it's nice to give back. We're grateful for the opportunities that CRC and others offer, and for the opportunity we have to just show up and help contribute to the physical work of it.
Yeah,
that
we
you
don't
guys
have
are-
to organize it. And it's nice.
Yeah.
We look forward to it every spring. In fact, I think there's our first tree planting is next week that we can be involved in. And so it's just a good time for us to spend together as a family and to do, it's really not that much effort on our part to get together and plant some trees and to have a great outcome. So,
Like I said, it's important for us, for our kids to learn what we had already learned, which is the value of giving back, healthy habits, that you can make a difference. And like Emily said, I really personally appreciate the opportunity to go back to these planting sites and to see them next year, 2 years, several years down the road, and see the work that we have done and how it's contributed in a positive way.
Thank you so much for sharing, Brian and Emily, and thank you for you and your family's involvement. We really appreciate you, and I'm very happy that Ron found you and brought you to the team. So professional researchers have realized the benefits of involving community scientists, and since community science has grown increasingly popular since the 18th century, we'd like to invite you to join us in creating a community of scientists and environmentalists. There are many paths to finding us and the right program for you. And I encourage new volunteers to subscribe to our volunteer email notifications. We send them out about once a month to announce new and upcoming needs, as well as report out on past activities. I'd also like to invite you to call me at the number listed above if you'd like to have a more in-depth conversation about any of the programs I mentioned today, about your interests, so we can match you to the best activity for you. All our upcoming activities get posted on our events calendar, and finally found all the information online for registration links, contact information, program details, and even reports. You can visit our webpage at ctriver.org/volunteer for that as well. I think that is the end of my presentation today. I very much appreciate all the volunteers who joined me today in talking about our programs, and all of the audience members who joined us today to hear about what we have to offer and how you can get involved. Thank you all for your time.
Awesome, Aliki. And everybody, thank you so much first to our presenters and Aliki. And I think everyone can tell how much we are indebted to volunteers, and there is no way we could tackle all of these programs without the people who come and help make that possible. So we'd love for you all to join us as well. And we're going to switch to Q&A now. So I'm going to bring back our speakers, spotlight them. And if folks want to put their videos on, there's not a tremendous amount of people that we can't just do raise hands and stuff with questions. Let me just make sure I get everybody spotlighted. Who am I missing? Rodrigo. So yeah, please, no question is unheard of. You know, how you can get involved, what it's like. Would anyone like to kick it off? And even maybe any of our presenters might have a question for another. While you're thinking, I'll just put in a little plug that we have many, as Aliki mentioned, many volunteer opportunities coming up, and we also have more of these live streams. So the very next one is May 4th, and it's called You're in My Garden, Sustainable Home Gardening Solutions for Cleaner Water. So I'm gonna leave the intrigue of that title up to you, and you can check it out on our events page. And also we have a live stream page. And I will share by email all these links and stuff, so don't worry about jotting down URLs. Anybody have a question? Aliki, do you want to just repeat, or maybe show the website and how people can see all of the programs and kind of maybe do a little walkthrough?
Sure. Give me just a minute.
Also, I will add a comment, if I may, which we discussed when we were talking about what we might say. I think it's important for people to realize, if you're thinking about participating in any of these, some of these programs, none of them require experience. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know anything about what you were doing beforehand. They will show you what to do. The people who've done it before and the people who are running that day will tell you about for example, the water chestnut pulling. And we haven't done the sea lamprey and so forth, but I'm sure they're the same. But also, I think it's important to realize that a lot of these things can fit into what you might not regularly do. I mean, for us, we boat anyway. So, so there's a Saturday morning or Wednesday evening, whenever it is, we just go to Barton's Cove and boat. Oh, well, we're actually pulling up water chestnuts, but it's the same kind of thing. And the source to sea cleanup especially is something you can just put a little bit of time in. You can do it one time. Or I'm a big one for encouraging people, just take it upon yourselves to adopt a section of road or river and just pick up trash as you go. The big things like tires and so forth, you have to deal with getting rid of them. So that's a separate issue. But it's really easy to do a one-time thing. You don't have to make a long-term commitment. I think sometimes people worry that, once you start, you might get hooked. That's a risk, but that's in your control.
And a good thing.
Nobody's going to be on you saying, oh, you did it last time, now you have to do it this time. So, if you've got an hour, a couple of hours on a Saturday morning or whenever an evening to do a water show, you do it one time. Just get out there and do it, and bring some friends with you, because, it can be a lot of fun. It's a fun activity to do with a group too. Our neighbors actually, and we set up a source to sea cleanup team. And we just did what we do every day anyway, but we did it in more depth, and we had a way to get rid of the stuff, the huge heaps of stuff, with additional things we collected. That is all.
Thank you, Gary. That's great. And if people have more cleanup questions, I'll put my info in the chat also, because I coordinate the cleanup effort, which happens every September, or anytime you see trash. Thank you.
Thank you both, Gary and Stacy, for adding that. And yes, I've just pulled up the volunteer page on our website. It's actually just under Get Involved. And from there, you can sort of see all the various opportunities and activities we have to offer. They're categorized by, what type of program they are. Some of them are group programs, and others offer job opportunities. And then some of them are recurring. So there's a recurring commitment throughout the season. And we also have our calendar listed on that page, so you can see all the events we've got coming up. As Brian and Emily had mentioned, our first tree planting is coming up this season, and that is April 22nd, which is next Friday. You can subscribe to the volunteer e-news directly from this page, and you can even find events near you through the map that we've provided. And then, of course, contact information. I always enjoy people reaching out to me, especially by phone, if they have any questions or they just like to discuss their capacity.
Thank you, Aliki. Why don't we give another moment for folks to ask some questions, and then we can call it a day, and that's great. Want to thank everybody so much for taking the time to be here, especially to Aliki and Emily, Brian, Gary, and Rodrigo for sharing all that you do. And welcome, Rodrigo, to our staff team as well. That's really exciting. And hope that we'll see you all out there in the field. Any other parting thoughts, Aliki? Looks like a quiet team today.
I think I've said everything I need to say. For everyone who's interested in joining us, like we mentioned, no experience needed for a lot of these programs. And come once, just try it out, see how it feels. And if you want to come again, that'd be lovely. And if you want to move on to the next program, that's great. There's a ton of different projects and even other organizations that do great things for our watershed. And CRC is a great resource for finding the right fit for you and your lifestyle and what your environment needs.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we hope that we'll see you at a future live stream and a future volunteer opportunity. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Stacy.